Hello everyone, and welcome. I'm Kai, and in this installment of the Quran in Context series, we continue exploring the influence that Ethiopic Christianity had on Muhammad and his Quran. Specifically, we look to better understand the Quranic reference to a so-called preserved tablet. Many people gravitate to the Quran out of fear. They read it and get scared by the constant threats Allah makes in it about hellfire. Becoming or remaining Muslim after reading the Quran often amounts to little more than Pascal's wager. Better to not err on the side of hellfire. Having been drawn in emotionally, Muslims then make up nonsense to convince themselves intellectually that the Quran is some kind of beautiful masterpiece. Basically, Muslims exhibit Stockholm Syndrome when it comes to defending Islam. Defend one's oppressor, the Quran, by rationalizing one's own oppression. Removing the emotional elements and getting out of the abusive relationship necessitated by the Quran allows one to see the Quran for what it really is: a bunch of incoherent nonsense. In previous videos on the channel, we explored the Ethiopic influence on Islam, namely the Quranic accounts of Abraham, temple worship, Jerusalem, and the Ark of the Covenant, and their connections to Ethiopic Christianity in general and the Ethiopic Christian book of Jubilees specifically. We continue exploring Islam's connection to Ethiopic Christianity. As mentioned in a previous video, parts of the Islamic Ummah at one point fled to Abyssinia to escape persecution. Even though Muhammad himself may not have gone there, parts of his Ummah certainly did, and upon returning, very likely influenced him with what they observed and learned of Ethiopic Christianity while sojourning there. There are also other ways in which Muhammad was in contact with Ethiopians. For example, we know that, quote, Abyssinian slaves appear to have been not uncommon in Mecca after the rout of the famous Army of the Elephant, and it would not have been difficult for Muhammad in his boyhood to have learned many words for religious significance from such sources. It must also be borne in mind that during the Aksumite occupation of South Arabia, many Ethiopic words of cultural significance may have come into current use in Arabia through commercial and political intercourse, end quote. And, quote, that Muhammad himself had personal contact with people who spoke Ethiopic seems to be indicated from the fact that tradition tells us that his first nurse was an Abyssinian woman, Ayman, that the man he chose as first muezzin in Islam was Bilal al-Habashi, and the tradition already noted that the Prophet was particularly skilled in the Ethiopic language, end quote. Not to mention that Surah 105, Surah al-Fil, or Surah of the Elephant, in the Quran is about the supposed invasion of Mecca by an Abyssinian Christian king. The point here is to demonstrate that the Arabs in general, and Muhammad in particular, were very much in contact with Ethiopians and, therefore, exposed to Ethiopic Christianity. Once you remove the emotional blinders when reading the Quran, you immediately realize that the Quran does not actually give you much information on a lot of things. Much in the Quran is mentioned with little to no detail, often just a passing remark. The typical Muslim response is that if information is lacking, then that is because it is not needed. We hear this response often from Muslims. What they want you to accept is that the Quran, the supposed final revelation to all mankind for guidance, is purposefully vague, obscure, and cryptic. But then why reveal anything at all? If there's no useful information to be obtained from revelation, then revelation is meaningless. Why would God reveal something meaningless and call it guidance? This is cognitive dissonance and an objection with which Muslims cannot adequately deal. In reality, things are scantily mentioned in the Quran due to Muhammad not comprehending the full extent of what exactly he is stealing from other religions, and or relying on an underlying subtext with which there is an assumption the audience is already familiar in order to fill in the blanks. In Surah 85, verse 22, there is mention of a so-called preserved tablet or slate, Lawh Mahfuz. It is mentioned only once in the Quran. The context suggests that the Quran is inscribed on it. Quote, but this is an honored Quran inscribed in a preserved slate." End quote. Beyond that, all exegesis of what exactly this preserved tablet is, what else it may contain, or why it is even necessary is complete speculation on the part of Muslims. Apart from containing the Quran, typical Muslim responses with regards to the preserved tablet are, among other things, that it also contains God's prior revelations to mankind, that it contains a record of Qadr, which is understood to mean divine decree of all that is to happen until the day of resurrection, and that it is heavenly in the sense that it is inaccessible to alteration by Satan. If we are to look at the issue from a purely Quranic perspective, meaning what the Quran itself says about the preserved tablet, then these additional understandings are all speculative. There is nothing in the Quran itself that indicates the preserved tablet contains anything else but the Quran, or that it is anything but the Quran. You cannot even say that the preserved tablet is heavenly. Perhaps it is something earthly that is guarded with God-tech security to prevent its alteration. But the likely explanation is that Muhammad stole the idea of a preserved tablet from the Ethiopians, and the more we examine the Ethiopic connection, the better we understand the preserved tablet mentioned in the Quran. The Ethiopic Book of Jubilees has numerous references to heavenly tablets, Slat Samai. But more than that, we can identify from the Book of Jubilees multiple senses of what the heavenly tablets are. In the Brill publication Between Philology and Theology, Contributions to the Study of Ancient Jewish Interpretation, author Florentino Garcia Martinez identifies the heavenly tablets, as presented in the Ethiopic Book of Jubilees, to be understood to encompass the following. 1. The law given to Moses, and by this is meant the Torah and the tablets. 2. A heavenly register of good and evil. 3. Book of destiny, or judgment, or ordainment. 4. Calendar and feasts. And 5. New laws. This last point about new laws is meant either that which is not explicitly written in the law given to Moses, but derived from it. For example, the mandatory covering of one's genitals following the narrative in Genesis chapter 3, verse 21, where God covers Adam and Eve's genitals. In this case, the narrative of the event is realized as an actual law to cover the genitals. Then there are new laws altogether not found in the law given to Moses. For example, executing male Jews who give away their daughters or sisters in marriage to Gentiles. This last point about the heavenly tablets containing new laws is especially relevant for the Islamic understanding of the preserved tablet. It is no coincidence that the aforementioned understandings as identified by Martinez found their way into Islam. Moreover, the Quran itself encapsulates the various understandings as presented in the Book of Jubilees. Though the tablets and Torah given to Moses are not directly identified in the Quran as belonging to the preserved tablet, that they are mentioned in the Quran can be argued that by extension they are part of the preserved tablet. The heavenly register of good and evil can be argued is what Surah 18 verse 49 and Surah 54 verses 52 to 53 discuss and therefore form part of the preserved tablet. Quote, "And the record of deeds will be placed open, and you will see the criminals fearful of that within it. And they will say, 'Oh, woe to us! What is this book that leaves nothing small or great except that it has enumerated it?' And they will find what they did present before them, and your Lord does injustice to no one." End quote. Quote, "And everything they did is in written records, and every small and great thing is inscribed." End quote. The notion of destiny, or divine decree, being recorded in the preserved tablet can be argued from Surah 27, verse 75, Surah 34, verse 3, and Surah 57, verse 22. Quote, "And there is nothing concealed within the heaven and the earth except that it is in a clear register." End quote. Quote, "But those who disbelieve say, 'The hour will not come to us.' Say, 'Yes, by my Lord, it will surely come to you. Allah is the knower of the unseen, Not absent from him is an atom's weight within the heavens or within the earth, or what is smaller than that or greater, except that it is in a clear register." End quote. Quote, "No disaster strikes upon the earth or among yourselves except that it is in a register before we bring it into being. Indeed, that for Allah is easy." End quote. That Muslims are to keep a calendar and observe feasts are found in Surah 2 verse 189 and Surah 9 verse 36. Quote, "They ask you, O Muhammad, about the new moons. Say, they are measurements of time for the people and for Hajj." End quote. Quote, "Indeed, the number of months with Allah is 12 lunar months in the register of Allah from the day He created the heavens and the earth." End quote. With regards to new laws and the preserved tablet, the connection is especially interesting. Surah 5 verses 48 and 49 established that the Quran is a new set of laws distinct from previous scriptures. Quote, "And we have revealed to you, O Muhammad, the book and truth, confirming that which preceded it of the scripture and as a criterion over it. So judge between them by what Allah has revealed and do not follow their inclinations away from what has come to you of the truth. To each of you we prescribed a law and a method. Had Allah willed, He would have made you one nation united in religion, but He intended to test you in what He has given you. So race to all that is good. To Allah is your return altogether, and He will then inform you concerning that over which you used to differ. And judge, O Muhammad, between them by what Allah has revealed, and do not follow their inclinations, and beware of them, lest they tempt you away from some of what Allah has revealed to you. And if they turn away, then know that Allah only intends to afflict them with some of their own sins. And indeed, many among the people are defiantly disobedient." End quote. This new revelation by which Muhammad is to judge is the Quran mentioned in Surah 85 verse 21. And it is what is inscribed in the preserved tablet as narrated in verse 22. In other words, new laws not reflected in prior scripture are to be found inscribed on the preserved tablet. So all of the distinct understandings of the heavenly tablets we find in the Ethiopic Christian book of Jubilees find their parallels in the Quran. Now, Muslims can dismiss these connections and deny any Ethiopic influence. That's fine. They can go back to reading a vague, obscure, and cryptic Quran, all the while inventing explanations and coping that the Quran is divine revelation from Allah. But those who are not emotionally hampered by the Quran's threats of hellfire, they can appreciate that the Quran is a man-made product of its own time and place, having nothing to do with divine revelation, readily stealing from various religions and communities. And while many have pointed out Syriac Christian influence on the Quran and Islam, there seems to also be a very intimate Ethiopic influence as well that should continue to be investigated. It seems ironic that the Quran, which Muslims believe to be the final revelation to all mankind for guidance, necessitates Christian and Jewish subtexts in order to understand the supposed guidance. But then again, let's remind everyone what the Quran says. So if you are in doubt, O Muhammad, about that which we have revealed to you, then ask those who have been reading the scripture before you. The truth has certainly come to you from your Lord, so never be among the doubters. And let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed therein. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the defiantly disobedient. So when we as Christians do exactly as the Quran suggests, use our scripture to evaluate the truthfulness of Muhammad's prophetic claim, we conclude that Muhammad was a fraud.